Residents of the City of Lincoln, welcome to the pre-council for April 22nd, 2019. This meeting is governed by the Open Meetings Act. LB 898 is posted at the back of the room. I think we're going to have a presentation from more than one group today, at least Parks, maybe more. Looks like Urban Development's in front of us right now.
Absolutely.
So we have multiple presentations from multiple people, and we're kind of cheating into the director's meeting. So it would be wonderful if we all held our questions till the presentation was over. Let the presenter go through all the material, then we'll have questions, and then we'll move to the next presenter, okay? So please make notes of your questions and hold them to the end. At that point, I'm gonna stop talking and say, Mr. Landis, please.
Thank you.
Enlighten me.
I appreciate it, Chairman Show. Dave Landis, Urban Development Department. This document is the 2009 West Haymarket Integrated Development Plan. It was the plan for what to do about the Catalyst project, which had been announced in 2005's master plan, and that was the arena, and endorsed by the public shortly thereafter. This is a map of that integrated plan. It runs from the arena all the way to what we're talking about today, Block 4 and Block 5. All of that was contemplated in the JPA integrated plan. The topic today is this conclusion of one Catalyst project in the form of Block 4 and Block 5, and in fact, the creation of a Catalyst project for 2018's downtown master plan, which was a park on Block 5. So it's the ending of one and the beginning of another. If you take a look at this map, it shows you where the arena started, and you can see the development that has followed from there. We're talking about the Hyatt, we're talking about the rail yard, Huddle, Olson 1, Olson 2, built at a rather blinding speed by comparison to other cities. Then you have the Harris Overpass, and we now start the Block 4, which we'll talk about today, and part of the development team, Clay Smith, Kent Seacrest are here today, and then Block 5's park. This is a look at one view from one corner of the Block 4 development. It contains a couple of significant elements. It has a very important affordable housing component, and it is an economic development opportunity as well, both in residential and commercial. Step across the street and you see Block 5, and this time you're looking from the north to the south. You'll see to the right the playing fields, the spaces, the dog park, the trail connection, and to the left you'll see again economic development opportunity in the form of a development site. It's been blocked in with a building there just to show you where the site could be, a plaza in front, and then behind a piece that I think means something to this city and to this project. Taking a look at the aerial view of the same area and emphasizing the Block 5 area. There's a box down here. This is the box for the redevelopment agreement, or redevelopment area. And then to the south, J.W. Woollum. J.A. Woollum, thank you for the correction. This is a long-standing employer. They import money from all over the world. They hire UNL graduates. They pay them a very handsome amount of money to do excellent work that is internationally known. They need a permanent home that will allow them to expand. Part of the discussion that's brought us here today is the finding of space and the distribution of parking and resources allowing Woollum to expand in this area. And we think that's part of the story of the opportunities created by this capstone event, this Block 4 and Block 5. Going to the next one. This is hopping back to Block 4. But it shows, in fact, 3 buildings on this block. The 3 buildings are 2 buildings that are owned by Speedway and Nelnet. On this one, you'll see them in pink, and you'll see them in purple. And then you'll see a yellow building to the north. All 3 are 6 stories high. The purple and yellow are all residential units, 82 units of housing by the Haymarket Development Corporation, 41 of which are affordable housing. And by affordable, our definition is 60% of median income, and 50% of the units meet that standard, and 50% are market rate. The purple and the pink together have 153 residential units and 11,000 square feet of commercial space on the first floor of the pink building. So it has that active edge that we're interested in on Canopy Street. It also has a generous amount of opportunity for on-street dining and the like, and harmonizes with the Canopy Street. If we jump to Block 5 again, you see the J.A. Woolen area identified before, but this is coming from the south looking north. Then you'll see the Block 5 redevelopment parcel. The footprint that we've chosen so far is 38,000 square feet on the ground floor. Height limit in this area is 75 feet. That's 6 floors. 6 floors would, if we used all of that density and had a taker that would use it, would be 225,000 square feet. A handsome home for a corporate headquarters. It could be housing. It could be a mixed use, but it represents a very substantial redevelopment opportunity. This is why the park itself is a catalyst project. One of the reasons you'd want to be at that location is you're right next to a park. One of the reasons that J.A. Woolen would like to stay there is because it would be right next to the park. The Block 4 3 buildings all look out in part towards green space, and they are oriented towards the park. One other aspect is to consider the land, in this case to the south, that takes that tornado curve. Those are older brick buildings in many cases. The kinds of buildings that have been refurbished in other cases, they become development opportunities. The same magnetism that will be there because of the park and the development and the Block 4 will be true to the south. In other words, this has a chance of being a substantial catalyst project. One of the things that makes this work is a parking garage. And in fact, if my colleagues would like to come up and discuss the parking that supports this project, they would be most welcome.
As you can see from the slide, the parking garage will occupy the westernmost parcel on Block 4. It will have a footprint of approximately 45,000 square feet. It'll be 6 stories, containing 700 parking stalls. The design is consistent with the other 3 West Haymarket garages, JPA garages, and that will include the exterior lighting and the color-coded accents as well. The budget for the garage is approximately $14 million, $20,000 per stall, and that includes the site acquisition cost of $900,000. Now, the appraised value of that site is $1.8 million, so the cost of 50% is an acknowledgement that both the JPA and the city are receiving value here and that we're partners in this development. The construction is financed by parking bonds and by $1 million aid to construction developer payment.
I think that gets to my portion, which is the parking bond package. So when you look at the ordinance, the total bonds of 49.88 million, you got 28 million in new funding and then 21.88 million in refunding bonds. So I wanted to talk about some of the changes in the structure of the bonds too. We're recommending to go from tax exempt bonds to taxable bonds. So in order to be able to call these bonds, the tax reform laws that went into effect in December 18, you can't do advance refundings on tax exempt bonds anymore. So in order to call them for advance refunding, we have to do them as taxable bonds. So why do we want to basically issue taxable bonds? Well, the difference in the spread and the basis points between a taxable and a tax exempt bond have shrunk because of the tax reform. So economic developments, more than anything, need flexibility within their agreements with entities for parking. Under tax exempt bonds, you can only have a certain percent, usually in general 10% of those parking could be reserved for a private entity. So by issuing taxable bonds, this gives us more flexibility in the end to work within those economic development agreements to promise parking to these private entities. Still going through taxable bonds, we're currently looking at estimating a 5% net present value savings. So in the end, by refunding the current outstanding bonds, we're going to be saving money, but give us more flexibility in the end on economic development agreements. Within this too, there's a change in opinion on the backing of the bonds. So right now we have parking revenue bonds. They're backed by highway allocation dollars. So they're treated more in the traditional sense of a revenue bond, that you have a debt service coverage requirement, a 2.0. You have debt reserve funds that are also set aside as part of the bonds. Basically, under the current council's opinion, if we have parking bonds that are issued with a highway allocation backstop, you also have to have a general obligation backstop, meaning you're pledging property taxes. So it's almost, there's three revenue streams there that you're saying parking revenues first, next highway allocation dollars, third property taxes. Right now they've been backstopped with highway allocation funds. We've never used them before. So the benefit of doing this would also take our current rating from an A+ and then give us that AAA rating by having that property tax backstop. So we're going to get a higher rating with these parking bonds, which means lower interest for these bonds in the end. In addition, there's still protections within the bond ordinance that require a 1.0 debt service coverage for the parking revenues. So if we didn't ever have enough parking revenues, the bonds would essentially be in default. You still have that backstop there, but there's a protection there, I think, for the city that you do have that 1.0 coverage.
Let me step on, Wayne, come back to you, pardon me.
Yes, excuse me. So of the new funding from the bond is $28 million. So we're looking for that at up to $14 million for the Block 4 parking garage. There is, again, $1 million developer contribution to that as well. $6.6 million would be, excuse me, would be for the acquisition of the Block 65 property. That's the Sharp block. And $7.4 million was for the Eagle parking garage acquisition and ultimately the renovation of that garage. Now, all of these items are in the CIP or were previously approved by council, with the exception of the Eagle garage renovation.
Now to briefly cover some of the existing refinancing. So you got about $21 million there that's going to be refinanced. GFOA typically recommends anywhere from a 3 to 5% range for advanced refundings. So with the 2011 bond that's outstanding, we're estimating $1.3 million in savings with that bond. For the 2012, there's actually a cost of $100,000. So net savings between the two, you get about $1.2 million in savings, which is about how we get to that 5% savings threshold. The savings are going to be structured over the remaining life of the bonds of that 12 to 13 years. So it'd be a flat savings over the term. And then also the debt continues to remain structured over the original term of the outstanding bonds. So we're not lengthening the term at all. And then with that, I think.
Shall we
Dave's gonna
talk about some of the Block 4 funding? People have wanted to know about the money on that one. This is one body of information. You'll also be given a copy of the sources and uses for TIF. But taking a look at the overall concept of the project, the developer in this middle category contributes $38.8 million. The right-hand column breaks that out between the LHDC at $12 million and the Speedway Nelnet piece, which is $26 million. That's the total for those $38 million. There are $7.4 million of public funds, 6.4 of it, if you move to the right-hand column, are TIF. But there's two other sources of funds that make this project work. One is a subsidy, if you will, that the city is going to do with respect to affordable housing. Anybody familiar with affordable housing knows that to build new for low rents, by comparison, you have to have a subsidy in making that happen. The city's going to help. LHDC could close out the $86,000 they owe us, or we could let them keep that money and apply it towards this project. We're saying keep that money and apply it towards this project. That's $86,000. There's $100,000 of tax TIF admin fee that we have collected above the threshold of $200,000 and therefore is available for affordable housing uses. Trent Fellers and a good portion of this existing council approved several years ago a provision that in the tax increment financing admin fee, we'd collect up to $200,000 of that fee, and it would go to the general fund for law, finance, urban development, the city's costs in doing this work. But above $200,000, it could go for affordable housing or problem properties. We observe that the $100,000 of contribution that we're making out of that pot is because we have that and somewhat more than that in that pot now. The second, or third rather, piece, the CDBG money, the TIF admin fee, and the third one is affordable housing. You put in the budget most recently that the turnback tax given to us by the state on behalf of the area around the arena would be used for affordable housing. In fact, state law says that if you're going to break this out of what you're doing, it has to be spent for affordable housing. The council decided to do that, and we've cordoned that money off for that purpose. If we use some of that money from 2 different years, we get to the total of what LHDC told us they needed in the way of subsidy. That number was 522, and we've met it. The last piece on that is on the right-hand side. JPA has a number of $475,000. Now, JPA eventually makes more than $1 million in land sales, but they do contribute, in this case, by doing some of the streetscape along Canopy Street and a couple of other sides of the Block 4 building. This is not uncommon. This has happened not only at the Olson's building, but on several other projects that JPA has contributed. When you add it all up, the Block 4 pieces, not counting the garage, but counting the streetscape, the 3 buildings, and the subsidy, totals $46.2 million. The TIF money itself, yes?
Sorry, was that, all right?
No.
Okay.
Keep going.
Thank you. All right. This is something that I think has been handed out to you. The TIF, these pieces are there, making their way. Well, you can see this in 2 different ways. It's in this handy pie chart form, but it's also in this form as well. We have the standard administrative fee, bond counsel, capitalized interest. There is a contribution from the Block 4 project to the Block 5 Plaza/Park, that's $762,000. The streetscape totals $915,000. The redeveloper will be using $440,000 of their TIF, and JPA will be assisting with $475,000. There is a demolition of $50,000. Site prep is $350,000. The acquisition of the land allows the developer to use $1.3 million to buy land from JPA. There are facade enhancements of $1.4 million. And then, not as part of the TIF, but as part of the whole package, is that affordable housing subsidy. Finally, there are energy enhancements, and these enhancements are TIF'd at $1.5 million. If you take a look at the left-hand column, you'll see the total costs, all of the potential expenditures that were there a TIF dollar for the developer could use. that column that I've just recited is the $6.4 million column. That's what the TIF will be used for. And the far right column is the gap. In other words, the TIFable expenses for which there are no TIF dollars to use, and that's $2.3 million.
So all that gets wrapped up into several legislative items that are on for first hearing today. They'll be on for public hearing at next week's meeting, and then they would be scheduled for a vote on May 6th. Those items would include a redevelopment agreement, the resolution that we approve with those, a CIP amendment resolution allocating and appropriating the TIF proceeds, the TIF bond ordinance that we often see with these projects, and then you'll have two items related specifically to the garage, one being a purchase agreement to actually acquire the property from the JPA, and then the bond financing ordinances for the garage system in general.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history of this. As Dave mentioned, there's been several processes talking about this project, West Haymarket on down through the park. We've been talking about it for nearly 15 years. Years before the arena was built, the 2005 Downtown Master Plan identified a conceptual plan for the West Haymarket. In addition to the arena, parking facilities, private redevelopment, the plan showed a park at the terminus of the private improvements south of N. The concept for the park and plaza was also part of the South Haymarket Neighborhood Sub-Area Plan and was also part of the 2018 Downtown Master Plan. The 2018 Downtown Master Plan included significant public input in the development of the park and plaza as a catalyst project. The plan approved by the council in December identified 5 catalyst projects shown on the slide, and would require significant public investment to incentivize private investment in the downtown area. Discussion about the park, the 5th catalyst project, included the plaza, trail, and other amenities desired by the public. The park was anticipated to be the south bookend of the West Haymarket to the arena on the north, and was intended to catalyze private redevelopment in South Haymarket, for example, with the brick buildings that Dave talked about earlier. In short, this park has been part of the city's long-term plans for well over a decade, and we're now able to take these plans off the shelf, dust them off, and turn the vision into reality and keep our promise to the public for this key location. And I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Yeah, earlier this year, we worked with Olson's to develop a preliminary conceptual master plan for this parking plaza south of N Street. And part of this was we wanted to determine the configuration that would be needed in the future for that plaza and park area. We wanted to make sure there was an adequate footprint for the redevelopment project, that significant opportunity for the redevelopment project in Block 5. And we also wanted to make sure that we had the correct configuration for land that would be added to the land that's owned by the J.A. Willem Company for their future expansion as well. I should note that this image that you're seeing up here is very preliminary. It doesn't look like it's preliminary, but it is. And we intend to work with the community this summer to talk about this image, to get their input on the activity areas and that they'd like to see within this park. We're anticipating that we should have a final master plan by the end of summer. And with that final master plan, we'll also have a final cost estimate to work from as well. In developing this master plan, on the next slide, these were the activity areas that we included in development of that master plan. Certainly site infrastructure, that 4-block trail connection between N and J Streets, plaza improvements, a number of downtown neighborhood park improvements, some additional amenities that are a little beyond what would typically be in a neighborhood park. And then we have included an endowment for future capital repair and replacement costs. This is an estimated number right now, but it's about $9 million. Of that, about $1.5 million is for the endowment funds. And as you know, last week, we announced a very exciting happening. The J.A. Woolen Foundation has provided $1 million gift to this project. We want to make sure that we share both John Woolen and Kathy Rustermeyer for their generosity and their commitment to this project. The J.A. Woolen Foundation gift is conditional. It requires that the city provide matching funds by sometime in May. We're working towards that. I'll explain how we're making that happen. And then they're also hoping that we can leverage additional private gifts as well. So the funding that we have identified to date, if we could back, there we go, is the $1 million gift from the Woolen Foundation. We're proposing that the city match should be $1.1 million that is used to purchase the parkland from the Parks Foundation. The source of that $1.1 million is advanced land acquisition funds. Essentially, this is the fund that was set up by charter where when the city sells land, the proceeds go into the advanced land acquisition fund. They can only be used to purchase additional city land. The process that's resulted in the generation of this money is urban development selling city property, unneeded city property incrementally over time. Obviously, all of those sales were approved by the city council. There's about $1.3 million in funding that is within the urban development portion of the advanced land acquisition funds. And because this is really an economic development project, we're proposing to use $1.1 million of those funds to match the J.A. Woolen Foundation gift. The West Haymarket JPA, that $597,202 amount is broken into two pieces. $500,000 of that is coming from the JPA, is proposed to be coming from the JPA to be helping with development of the park, the infrastructure and the improvements. And then $97,000 is coming to the JPA from the land exchange with the J.A. Woolen Company. And we're proposing that the West Haymarket JPA dedicate that money to assisting with replacing and upgraded a needed storm drain line in the area. And then Block 4 TIF is identified here in the amount of $762,731, and we're anticipating that this would go to the plaza portion of the park project. And we treat them essentially as one project, but this would go to the plaza portion. So these funds total about $3.5 million of that $9 million figure that we are estimating. And we'd like to raise hopefully an additional $1 million by the end of the summer to continue this work. We've had some initial discussions with some people in the community about this, and those conversations seem to be going fairly well. This project can be phased. We don't need to build the entire project in one fell swoop. We can do it incrementally. And we think there's some elements like the plaza and probably the northern portion of the park that probably really need to be developed in conjunction with the new building in Block 5. The partners in this project are the JPA, the Parks Foundation, and the city. We see this as being obviously a win-win-win project. The JPA has an interest in developing a park in this area. They see it as being the catalyst for economic development, for encouraging additional development. They've carved out what probably is one of the key parcels in Block 5 for that redevelopment project. And the value of that piece of property is certainly enhanced by the future development of a parking plaza in the area. They will transfer ownership of the land to the Parks Foundation at no cost in exchange for a commitment that the Parks Foundation be involved in fundraising to help develop the park. And then the Parks Foundation will sell the land to the city. And part of the intent in doing that is we need to satisfy that condition of the $1 million gift from the Woolens of matching their $1 million gift. And the reason that it's being transferred to the city is that neither one of those other two partners are really in the business of building or developing parks. And so the city will take on the responsibility to build and operate the park when it's completed.
So before the council, get on the same schedule with first hearing today, public hearing on the 22nd, and anticipated vote on May 6th. Are a number of items with respect to this part of the transaction. One being a real estate exchange agreement between the city, the J.A. Woolen Company, also known as Cotswold Management, and then the JPA, the city, and Woolen. The city is a party to that because of the fact that there are some parking arrangements that will take place with respect to the park and the Woolham property. There's some interaction that's going to have to take place there to make that all work going forward. There's also the acquisition from the Parks Foundation, so that agreement will be before the council as well, whereby the city would pay the $1.1 million from the Land Acquisition Fund to the Parks Foundation to acquire that. As part of that acquisition, the property would be deeded to the city for park purposes. That's done specifically to make certain that this property is only used for a park going forward. The other item is a resolution for the council to dedicate and declare that this will be a park parcel going into the future. And then I think the final item is a CIP amendment whereby the 1.1 million in advance acquisition funds are added to this project, and then an additional $6 million in other financing to make that future development of the park a possibility. And so this Thursday, the JPA will consider its agreement to convey land over to the Parks Foundation, as well as the exchange agreement. And then again, we'll have public hearing on the 29th and would anticipate action on May 6th.
Tim has reminded me of something that I should have mentioned. The $1.1 million of city funds that is being transferred to the Parks Foundation to purchase the land will be held by the Parks Foundation for development of the site. So those funds are tied specifically to development of the land in the future.
Yeah. More?
Just to say
That's
this,
the slide I was waiting for.
Yep.
Councilwoman Gaylor Baird, I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience with me.
No problem.
And then they go over
Mr.
there.
Landis, I wanted to ask more about the affordable housing funding streams. You had mentioned 3 different sources that comprise the Affordable Housing Grant Fund, CDBG, the money for affordable housing that we approved in the last biennial budget, and also TIF admin. Could you break down the amounts of each of those sources?
86,000 for CDBG, 100,000 from the admin fee, 337,412 from the turnback tax.
So, because we put in approximately $200,000 per year in the biennial budget for the affordable housing and turnback tax dollars, it's pretty much all of that money for the most part.
For the most part.
All but, okay.
More questions? No, thank you very much. Councilman Camp.
I'm going to ask some
This is, yeah, everybody.
higher level questions. I think I'd like to meet with you later because to really go through the transaction. So you added a lot here and we didn't know about it till last Wednesday, at least I didn't. So when you say 1.0 debt coverage, that just means there is no reserve. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, that means that parking revenues have to meet or have a 1.0 debt service coverage so that, the parking revenues come in net operations, that the revenues left over have to meet those debt
No
service.
rainy day fund reserve.
No, there's no rainy day.
And you're using
fund.
parking revenues from the whole city parking system. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I know when we did the Eagle and the Sharp building lots, Wayne had said, and I talked to him Friday a little bit about this, that basically used up the bonding authority for parking fund. And so why is there now money there for that?
No, when I said that it had used up the funding, we were talking about this particular bond. We have the financial resources to manage the debt coverage on the full $49 million that we're talking about here. That's the construction of the Block 4 parking garage, the purchase and renovation of the Eagle Landmark garage, and the purchase of the M Street garage and the property underneath that, and the service lots.
Can you do any more parking now?
Not for some years.
Estimate of how many years?
Hard to do, but there is some flexibility, John, in one of 2 ways. One, we have a limited strategy of price increases and we've run them out 2 times. We haven't run them out longer, and we've asked for that, and that will give us some resources we do not now have, which would allow us to expand our bond coverage. The second thing is.
Those would be several years from now, though, I believe, or, because you still have, what, 1 or 2 increases to come?
Right, we've got a couple of increases, but we could start that planning now, and if you could find a demonstrable pattern that the folks would, that review this would accept, we would start creating more bonding authority. Second place, a place that you and I agree on, is that there's.
We agree all the time.
Thank you, there's money to do this, to do what we're talking about, inside existing parking resources. It's just that we don't spend all of the parking resources on parking.
So
We
is the
have the
city gonna
money
give
to
up
do
some of
what
those?
we would need to do to support another bond, and we raise it, but we send it on to the city in the form of property tax relief, if you will, by general fund. The amount of money that we send to the general fund at $2.1 million would fund an additional garage.
So you're saying we would stop getting that, so from the city side,
There are
it would need
two
to find
ways
other
to get there
revenue.
from here. One, expand the revenues, or 2, alter the way that the revenue streams are going, or some combination of those 2.
Okay. And the bond, the $28 million bond was gonna be 13 years, is that correct? To match the,
You're talking about the portion of the new money? The 28 million, I think it's the new portion, new money portion, that'd be a 20-year. The refinancing would remain the same according to the original terms. So the 11 would be paid out in 12 years, and the 12s would be paid out in 13 years.
okay. Just clarification, you keep using the acronym LHDC, which stands for Lincoln Haymarket Development Corporation. But is this really, it's nonprofit, and then there are 2 kind of sister or subsidiary corporations, the Haymarket Housing Development Corporation and the Haymarket Revitalization, Inc. Those are the ones that have the Harding and Granger buildings that do housing. So are they not the ones that are going to be doing this as opposed to LHDC?
Want me to talk about it?
Can I do it?
Yep.
Councilman Camp, with respect to that, I spoke with a counsel who's been representing LHDC in these negotiations, and she indicated to me that you're right, there are subsidiaries of the Lincoln Housing, or Haymarket Development Corporation that own and operate the Granger Building. There's a separate one that owns and operates the Hardy Building. There would be a third one created to own and operate this building. So it would be a similar structure that they've used on their other.
But it sounds like you're going to have pledges of the Hardy building and the Granger to borrow, or you're not? So the
I
third,
don't-
how's the third one gonna borrow the money?
I don't believe there's any pledge in our agreements. How they're doing how they're doing the financing is entirely up to them. But there's nothing in our agreement that says they pledge their buildings towards the city or anything
Well,
like
you
that.
wouldn't be concerned about that, because if it's gonna go borrow 14 million, or 13 million, whatever it was, LHDC has no assets.
Right,
HRI and HHDC, the Hardy and the Granger have
It'd be the new
built-
subsidiary.
right.
But it doesn't have any property.
It's similar to other redevelopment projects we have where they create a subsidiary to have an agreement with us and are assigned the future responsibilities of that agreement. It's similar to many other agreements that we've done where that subsidiary then seeks permanent construction and permanent financing. And they do it on the basis of their standing, but again, it's a subsidiary of LHDC.
But the Granger and Hardy, you're saying this first and second, this would be the third. There are no assets in the third. I mean, a banker doesn't loan against no assets.
If that bank requires to have those assets as part of the collateral for that loan, that's not what we are requiring. That's what a bank might require.
But you've got a 44 million overall project, 7 million or so of city funds, one way or another. I don't know what JPA is, and I'll get to that in a minute. You got, you call it LHDC borrowing 14 million. That's a big leg of the stool of this project. Isn't the city concerned that LHDC can do that?
We sit in a room in which LHDC who is speaking as LHDC and not using the acronym you say, we have the Hardy Building, the Granger Building, we are almost all paid off, and we'd like to do this one as well. It contemplates, I think, that those are assets that in some umbrella form would be available. And in our repeated conversation with them, we've been saying to them, can you and do you have the financing? They say, yes, we do. Now, we don't require in this agreement that they make those things. Those are their relationships with the private sector and lenders. But we have on more than one occasion asked for, and the description has been not dissimilar to what you've described, that there are existing assets inside an umbrella organization. It's not unusual to have a business organization created for a particular venture. Speedway Motors, I'm guessing, is in a lot of different LLCs. Lots of people do that. But in our conversations with the developers, that's the representation the developers are making to us. But we don't ask them to recite in the redevelopment agreement their private agreements with their lenders. And many times they regard that as proprietary information that they don't want to be made public.
We require them to provide evidence of financial backing for the
Well,
project.
that's what I would think. And so what evidence has been provided to you?
They've discussed it.
To discuss it, we have seen one letter from a bank committing to the project. Not a formal loan commitment, there's still design work, the costs are still being worked out. But prior to the city's obligation to do anything further with the project and prior to their obligation to do anything, well, prior to the city's obligation to move forward on the project, including sale of the JPA land, we would require that they, and this is in the redevelopment agreement, they show what their financial backing is and that they have the financial wherewithal to complete this project.
Okay. On the, talking about you got the JPA and it's got the land now currently, and it sounds like you're asking the JPA to contribute quite a bit here. And you say at one point there were surplus funds, and a whole bunch of figures thrown out here. The land had a $1.8 million value, but you're only, the JPA is just gonna sell it for $900,000? Did I hear that correctly?
Before we get an answer to that, Councilman Camp, I'm looking at the clock, and I don't want to cut you off, but I
No,
want you to be considerate of everyone else.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, yeah, and I can break it.
Let's get an answer to that one, and if you have something else,
Sure, I'm sorry.
no, don't apologize.
Just real quick on the JPA finances and that around. So there's two graphs that I'm gonna show you. One is kind of the projected fund balance through the end of the life of the project, 2046. There's a circle on the back, that basically, so that shows through 2046, we're estimating $1 billion in revenue. The land sales, they're less than 1% of the total overall revenues of the project. So what matter most to the JPA are occupation taxes, the subsidies from the federal government, suite sales. So those are the kind of the main revenue streams coming in. So in the scope of the total project, the land sales are fairly minuscule, is what I'm saying. So do I believe my opinion that it's gonna hurt the JPA finances? No, I don't believe that based on what's been structured and proposed so far.
Well, before you came on board, when we did the West Hamburg JPA and so forth, there was also talk, this was the maximum loans, but if we can pay it down sooner, then we stop all these taxes to the citizens. And so we're basically using up all the cushions so the citizens cannot look forward to anything before 2046.
That's the same, I guess, with the surplus fund, if you're taking out of that, and the JPA, or the turnback tax, which is a city funding stream. Both of those are taking available resources that could potentially be used for debt retirement, yeah.
So, okay, so I mean, when we say JPA is donating this, we're ultimately taking money out of the taxpayers through all the occupation tax, 2% sales taxes. And I know we have some out-of-town people that pay that, but I just want people to understand, because that was a hot topic. They said, we're gonna try everything we can do to pay this down earlier. I guess that was pre-Brandon, but, okay, so we're not gonna pay it down earlier.
Well, we still may. It may generate some revenues that, we may, I'm gonna
There's a
put
lot
may
of
up.
estimates, 25.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Did someone else have a question? Oh,
Yeah, I
that's-
think Councilwoman Gaylor Baird, did you?
I do have some more questions. Is the Block 5 within the boundaries of the park, or is it separate from the park? Is it technically on parkland?
The building itself or the location?
The building, the redevelopment?
There's a separate building, a separate parcel being created for that redevelopment parcel.
So it's not parkland?
It is not parkland, no. On that parcel, that kind of blue-colored polygon is a separate parcel that is in JP ownership, or JPA ownership.
Okay. And then I noticed that in the TIF uses, the plaza use is, and you've carved that out as a designated funding amount, but the park design is not finalized. How fluid is that portion of the
The
TIF
762
uses?
is not fluid in the sense that it's in the redevelopment agreement and is binding. What is fluid is what's the total project costs and in what portions for design and construction and operation those might be.
Does that mean that the design is, there is a certainty that there will be a plaza then, even if the rest of the park is not designed?
That's
So
correct, yeah.
partly the design is complete.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Well, not complete, it's at the same level of master planning detail at this point, but we are certain there's going to be a plaza there. That it's the piece that has the most funding dedicated to it at this point.
Okay. And then on this chart where it says remaining, what's remaining? Where's that 2 million from?
That would be from the developer.
But it's not in the, okay, so it's not developer TIF, it's just developer private contribution?
Those are the TIFable expenses for which there are no TIF dollars.
Ah,
And developers want us
I
to,
get it.
they want us to know all of the good things they're doing for which they're not getting a TIF dollar of reimbursement. And they will lift that to our awareness quite commonly, so we passed it along to you.
okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions from the council?
I've got plenty.
I'm gonna give everybody else a
Okay, I
chance.
just-
Yeah,
yeah, I just-
no
I'm
one's
not
raising
done.
their hand, then we'll go back to you. And we're scheduled to end at 2:30, so we can go into our directors' meeting, so that's about 10 minutes.
Okay. Brandon, I don't think I heard then, what is the JPA selling the land to the city? It went through the foundation, no, I'm sorry, that's the park. What
Are you
is,
talking about the parkland?
I guess both Block 4 and Block 5, what is the JPA getting for that? I thought we were valuing it the equivalent of 38.80 a square foot.
1.1 million for the private land, about 900,000 for the land for the parking garage, and then
It's 2.7.
total of 2.7 million.
Now, as I understand it, the parking enterprise fund is only paying 900,000 of its
Yeah.
1.8 million share. So I understand that other 900,000 may be requested as a gift from the JPA, or where's that other 900,000 coming from?
I think that goes back to the mutual benefit that the JPA gets from parking, that Block 4 will help the JPA sell the future proposed development for the Block 5 land. In addition, you're talking about two separate governmental entities right now, but in the end, when the JPA goes away, it's all a city function. So, this parking garage, that's, yeah, they're gonna donate half of it, but at some point in the future, that will all, even the current JPA parking garages all become city parking garages.
When I looked at this part of the conversation, it struck me that the way to look at it was that the city and the JPA were partners. If the city doesn't do its share of this, and this development doesn't occur, JPA will be sitting there with a gravelled parking lot. No development, no valuation, no growth, no economic development. It'll be an empty block.
Yeah.
Until such time as a developer steps forward, and John, any developer who steps forward, and you would be the first to say, where's the parking? Which means to unlock the value of the JPA land, you have to provide the
I'll
parking.
have that conversation in 5 weeks.
You bet,
5 weeks.
exactly.
But, no, I'm just asking a question, I'm trying to see the money flow, I'm not I'm not speaking against the project, I just want to understand where it is and the subsidies, what it does to the taxpayers, because I see a lot of estimates to the year 2046. You're talking about the 1% fee that's charged by urban development for the excess over the 200,000, which I think I came up with something there so we could help get that back. And I'm just trying to understand how much we're really talking about ultimately here, and like if we're getting the Parks Foundation to do some things, but we're really giving them the money to give it back, and it gets confusing along the way.
So you want some type of net cash flow?
I think I need to
or-
sit down with you again, and sort of like I'd asked David last week too, it's just not possible in a meeting like this, but just to go through each step and really understand the sources and expenditures of funds. So, I mean, that might be the best thing, just to understand that. But I guess from the Parks Foundation, again, could you summarize again how its involvement is financially? So what it's getting, where it's coming from, what the city's putting in, if the JPA's putting in, and then that,
The JPA is providing the land for the Park and Plaza at no cost to the foundation, with the expectation the foundation will engage in fundraising activities. When the land
so the
transfers.
JPA gives the land,
It does give the land.
and so that's valued at how much?
Um,
I know it's a small part of this circle that Brandon gave us, but nonetheless,
Yeah, and we've done, I'll probably have to get back to John.
is that
'cause we-
another 2 million, 3 million?
It's in that range, yeah. We have not done an appraisal specific for that piece of property, but we know the appraised value of the adjoining pieces. So we can extrapolate and come to a value of that piece.
I think we
of
should
property.
know that, so we understand. So again, that's taken away on the JPA, because it's donating other sums, or that 900,000 or what have you. So suddenly we're talking millions of dollars here that are coming out of the JPA as a subsidy.
However, we are required to maintain that land for flood storage.
Yeah.
So it is not developable land like other parcels, like the Block 5 parcel or Block 4. So we wouldn't be able to otherwise build on that entire parcel.
But we still bill on
There are
a good
limitations.
portion.
There's a portion
There's
that
some
can be
measures
built
to be
on. There's a
taken.
portion that
I'm just
has-
asking the numbers,
Yep.
really. Is there an anticipation of what, I guess the JPA would get that last project there on that 225,000 six-story building you're saying? So what would that be appraised at on that land?
I don't think there's been an appraisal done on that piece of property, taking into consideration the value of the plaza and the parkland. I'm guessing that happens in the future.
Seems like we use the $38.80 a square foot for most things.
Block 4. And by the way, it's quite possible, you might think about this, but I think the marketability of that land may be greater because it is where it is. It's now proximate to a garage, and it's proximate to a park. That might make it a more attractive feature than using simply 3880, which is our existing appraisal.
I'll have park discussion in 5 weeks. What did the JPA, if you could apportion out what it paid to remediate this land when it took it from the Burlington Railroad? What, there was a lot of remediation. We had the salvage yard and everything. What did that cost?
And that's something I'm gonna have to
Okay, if you would.
research and get
Yeah.
back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all sunk costs, right?
Thank you all for your.
Other questions? Any rebuttal, wrap-up? Nothing? I like the way you,
Do we
So-
want to hear from either Nelnet or Speedway here? I'm not sure who Kent represents. I think
Welcome to their
Smith
conversation.
represents Speedway.
anyone else like to speak about this project, development? All right. I would like to then,
We want to respect your time, so only.
We've got 2 minutes, Kent, one for you and one for Clay.
how about we adjourn the pre-council, take a small sidebar for that, and then come back for our director's meeting in about 95 seconds.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for your attention.